Hello, and welcome to another episode of Mobile Technology Spotlight, sponsored by Samsung Electronics of America and presented by Public Safety Insight. Samsung is committed to supporting public safety and helping first responders to use technology as a force multiplier. I'm Dale Stockton, and today I'll be talking with Dave Straede, who has more than 40 years of experience in public safety IT. He recently retired from the Santa Barbara Police Department, and he's with us today because he's one of the most knowledgeable and experienced tech people we have ever met. He was one of the first to deploy Dex in the police car, and that's something we'll hear more about in just a few minutes. So let's turn to Dave. Dave, thanks so much for being with us today. And why don't you just share a bit about the Santa Barbara Police Department and what your role has been with that agency?
Good morning, and thanks for having me on. The police department in Santa Barbara serves about 27 square miles. It has a population of 100,000 and is an authorized sworn force of about 140. The PD has always been its own dedicated IT department, and it's not only served the PD, but also the CGIS provider for like 14 different law enforcement agencies. I served as most of the senior technical roles at that agency, starting in 1983 as a computer operator and ending a few months ago as the network administrator doing networking, servers, security, and mobile systems.
Wow. Well, with more than 40 years experience in LA, that's just incredible. What were some of the major changes that you experienced in your career?
Well, when I started there, we had two servers. We had one operating a criminal justice system for the county and one that did traffic citations and parking citations. There was no email, no CAT or RMS, and information security basically meant locking the front door. That expanded over the years to over 200 desktops and notebooks, well over 200 mobile phones, 35 different patrol vehicles that had computers in them, over 70 servers, I think, at a last count, dozens of applications. And I think cybersecurity really became my primary role.
And I'm sure you saw a lot of changes in 4 decades. So you were talking about the agency. How about a broader overview of the way that mobile technology, specifically smartphones and tablets, are now being leveraged by public safety around the country as a force multiplier?
It started probably mostly as getting officers out of the station and keeping them productive out in the field. But likewise, I think it's also become empowering to investigators, capturing digital evidence, and querying criminal justice information outside of the car. But in the big picture, that sort of meant computers had to be in every car, smartphones in everyone's hand, and eventually every employee got a smartphone. I think the key was making them cost-effective, manageable, and most importantly, getting functional apps on them to do stuff like CAD, RMS, evidence capture, and more.
Understood. So, Dave, your agency was one of the first in the country to implement the Dex program. And for those that may not know, Dex is short for Desktop Experience. It's a capability provided by Samsung. Could you provide an overview of what Dex is, and at least in the public safety environment, and your thoughts about its future?
Well, our department was always well funded, and we had the luxury of putting, fully loaded computers in every car, but that was a pretty expensive way to do it. So we initially turned to Dex because we estimated we'd save over $150,000 replacing the clique computers and modems and everything with a Dex solution with a little more compact. App parity was key to that deployment, to making it successful. And we also found the Dex system to be a great backup to the computer in the police car when that wasn't available. So we were able to switch between the two. I would say it was closely followed by success with our airport police. They didn't have the funding to do, all the gadgetry we had in patrol cars. So this became their one and only solution for mobile. It was so successful that both our park rangers and the harbor patrol and a couple other agencies that we talked to, followed suit, wanting to embrace that same technology in the cars. I think Dex will really take off as the CAT and RMS vendors embrace a mobile first strategy and making it a true alternative to desktops and Windows computers in the car.
So you mentioned and you explained it well, the use of Dex in the car. I just want to go a step further here before we move away from Dex. The concept, of course, desktop experience infers that it can be a replacement for an in-station computer. I don't know if your agency went there or not, but on a national scale, do you think it's feasible for an agency to rely on a smartphone as a single device for in-car, in-station, and in field where officers have full capability no matter where they are or what their assignment?
Well, it's getting there because more and more application vendors are making their device, their software web browser friendly. And so that really lends itself to it becoming a true desktop replacement. We're currently limited by some applications that can only run on a Windows computer, but we saw this as key for even places like hospitals and jails, where officers could sit down at a large screen with a full-size computer, do all their work, and we had no security concerns because the computer literally got plugged in when they left there and unplugged when they left, because they were simply docking their smartphone. And I also see, and there are many locations in buildings, whether those are patrol rooms or briefing rooms or report writing rooms, where you can't afford a computer on every desk, but a docking station Dex solution where they can just literally pop their phone in turns that from a $2,000 solution to a $200 solution. I think it will greatly expand the number of computers that we see available to officers and where they are.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's got great potential. Let's continue to talk about smartphones in a broader sense. What do you see as the future for mobile and emergency services? Just look way down the road. How do you see mobile use expanding?
I see eventually that, as you see, especially with the younger generation, the mobile device becomes their one and only device, in some cases. And with an officer, I see the vendors expanding those things into roles like being able to do every single CAD and RMS function, capturing all your digital evidence that way, no longer requiring separate cameras. Like in the S23 phone that I have, the camera is better than most CSI photo, the SLRs these days. So we had many officers that was the one and only way they took digital evidence. I see the ability to, ID suspects, not only with, like a facial recognition photo capturing kind of solution, but fingerprint recognition, from the fingerprint readers on phones. Building access, I think, is going to be something in the future, and it really solves the problem of officers not bringing their smartphone with them, so that they can serve as a key fob. And then, well, it seems like kind of a futuristic thing. I would not discount utilizing that phone when paired with a wearable device to watch, the officer's health, their stress level, their heart rate, or even if they leave their phone in the car or something else, that they have that SOS button right on their wrist there, without having to try and either retrieve a phone or whatever. So I kind of see these devices, you could easily get to the point where the newer generation, that's all they use.
Yeah, I like your comments, especially that one about the wearables. That's got such huge potential. So let's continue this talk about the future a little bit. There are some major changes ahead for agencies that need CJIS compliance on their smartphones for querying like criminal history in the field. And for those that may not know, CJIS is short for Criminal Justice Information Services Policy. I know you've presented on this topic at two major national conferences. What do you think are the top two or three, maybe even four takeaways the audience should be aware of in terms of changes coming with CJIS?
They're huge, and I don't think your average agency has really understood the depth of the changes, but I specifically, in my mind, see four significant things. The first one, and probably the most expensive and complex to handle, is multi-factor authentication for every device, including building computers, smartphones, patrol cars. Right now, while you're in your building or your patrol car, you're often just putting in a password, but now we're going to be talking that level of computer security everywhere. And what that basically means is that the policies that are currently mostly just applying to smartphones will apply to every device, regardless of its location. The FIPS 140-3 compliance that's coming, and I believe it's about a couple years out. That's going to be huge because it's going to involve replacing a lot of hardware and a lot of servers and software that's currently only FIPS 140-2 compliance and a standard for security. The yearly training requirement, I believe it's every 2 years now, but that's going to become a yearly requirement so that when you think about the scale of the larger agencies having to bring their people in for annual training. And then one thing I think nobody saw coming was that the FBI now is going to require identity proofing and identity evidence for every person. That means, the equivalent of kind of like going to get your real ID, that every agency is going to have to document how they know that Dave is really Dave and, showing the paperwork to do that.
That last one you mentioned, the identity proofing or verification, Dave, just to clarify, that is not for people going forward. That is for everybody in the agency that's dealing with CJI. Is that correct?
Yeah, and that's the scary part, because you have some agencies with thousands of employees, and the amount of effort to get every single employee, that some that have been there for 20 or 30 years, all this identity. I mean, I'm sure we'll even see places where people turn out not to be who they thought they were.
Interesting. So as we close this out, I want to ask you, with 4 decades of experience, you probably went through a lot of chiefs and administrators that needed a bit of hand-holding along the way in terms of technology. What recommendations would you have for an agency leader who maybe is just now thinking about leveraging mobile? How do they do it effectively? How do they get up to speed?
Well, we often operate in a vacuum in law enforcement, and the need to go and talk to and learn from other agencies that have deployed a mobile first strategy is key. I mean, site visits, conferences, talking to your peers. I learned more from other agencies and stuff probably than from books. I think you have to research these things and initiate pilot programs to make sure that this is the way you want to go. Because I've seen many implementations fail because they didn't get buy-in from the line level staff. So, the leadership always has to drive and enforce the change, but everybody from the street cop to the IT people to the records clerks, you always need to have various stakeholders in these things, and I think that to me is probably more important than anything else.
Well said. Dave, thanks so much for taking the time to be with us on the podcast today. This is great information. It was great to have you. And I want to mention to the audience, there is an article available on Santa Barbara PD's use of mobile. We'll make sure the link for that is in today's show notes. And with that, today's episode of Mobile Technology Spotlight will come to a close. It's been sponsored by Samsung Electronics of America and proudly presented by Public Safety Insight. Stay safe out there, everyone.